Welcome to Divorce School, and this module is about myths about marriage and divorce. I'm Mandy Walker. I'm a divorce coach and mediator, and you can find out more about me at my blog, sincemydivorce.com. I'm joined today by Cathy Meyer, who's a certified divorce coach and managing editor at divorcemoms.com. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Mandy. It's good to be here with you.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's such an important one to have because I think when we talk about the myths about marriage and divorce, it can really help people who are going through this to understand and accept the end of their marriage a little bit easier and to be less judgmental, have a little bit more compassion about going through divorce themselves.
Exactly. It's very important because, it's been my experience working with clients that the number one thing that holds them back is the guilt they feel and the untruths about divorce and marriage that they buy into.
Right, and it's buying into those untruths. It's so subconscious, and we don't even realize that we hold them, and those beliefs that we have below the surface, that until we start unwrapping them and analyzing them, that we start to question them and say, wait a minute, I don't really think that this holds true for me anymore.
Exactly.
So the first one I wanted to talk about was the one, I'm getting divorced, therefore I'm a failure. I'm sure you've heard that one from your clients, Cathy.
Yes, I'm a failure. I didn't work hard enough. No one in my family has ever been divorced before. And it's almost like they allow the end of a marriage to define who they are as a person.
Right, and that's exactly it. Divorce, what I tell my clients is divorce is not who you are. It's a life experience. It's just like graduating high school or college, marriage, birth of a child. Those are all life experiences. They're not who you are.
No, I believe our life experiences can impact who we are, but it doesn't have to impact who we are in a negative way. If your marriage ends and you can honestly say to yourself, I left no stone unturned. I tried everything I had to give to make it last. I learned what I needed to learn from it. Then you should be able to move ahead without any guilt associated with the end of that marriage at all.
Absolutely. And I think where we come up against that belief that we've failed if the marriage doesn't last is because our society used to have very rigid norms. And the expectation is that you got married, and the getting married was seen as succeeding. Where if you were a young woman, you weren't married by a certain age, you were left on the shelf, there was something flawed about you. And so,
yes, you were an old maid.
Well, yes, in England they're called spinsters, and it's like
spinsters, yes.
Whispered, she's a spinster, like disapprovingly.
Right. And I can remember doing that myself as a younger person.
Right.
There were two sisters that lived next door, but neither one of them had ever been married. So we talked about the old maids next door and, what must be wrong with them that no man would have them.
Right. And I think it's that sort of attitude that brings us to that belief that if the marriage ends, you're a failure. And fortunately now we don't have those, we're getting rid of those rigid societal norms. The ones about women getting married at a certain age, I think have been gone for a while, but a lot more are falling very rapidly now as we look at the gay community and the transgendered community and the progress that they're making there. I mean, we just need to break away from this idea that being divorced means you're a failure, because it's simply not true.
Well, it's simply not true. And I have a son who's 31 who married in April. His wife is 3 years older than him. Unlike me, she didn't graduate from college thinking, okay, it's time to find a husband. She graduated from college thinking to herself, it's time to build a career.
Right.
And her focus wasn't marriage. Her focus was on her life and doing what she needed to do to sustain that life and have a fantastic life. And I believe that kind of attitude is going to play in our younger generation's marriages lasting longer, because they're going to be better qualified when it comes to picking a mate.
And that's a great point, because what I also talk to my clients about is how, for us, having a lifelong marriage is really an unrealistic expectation. And it's unrealistic because we're very poorly trained to select a lifelong partner. Let me ask you this, Cathy. How many years of high school math did you do?
Well, one class for every year I was in high school.
All right, so you did.
And in college, I avoided it as much as possible.
Well, so that plays into the question. So you did 4 years of math. How many times a day do you use those high school math skills today?
Rarely ever.
Okay. How many years of interpersonal skills and communications study did you do in high school?
None. I remember taking a home economics class in high school, and I distinctly remember thinking, my home economics teacher told us when you marry, you become one. And I remember being confused by that statement because I didn't know how it would be possible to become one. But I also remember it skewing my idea of what marriage was.
Right. So, but those interpersonal skills, how many times a day do you use those?
Well, since I'm single, I don't use them anyway in a romantic relationship. I use them in my other relationships.
All the time.
But it's sad because these are skills we have to figure out as we go.
Right.
We're not taught.
We're not taught them, and yet we are expected at a very young age, and that again is changing because the average age of marriage in America now is like 26.1 or something. But so many people are expected in their early 20s to choose a partner and for it to be a lifelong partner. And yet we don't have the skills to do that.
No, I chose my partner based on the feelings of love that I had for my partner. And it's true what they say about love. It isn't all you need. You can't fall in love and get married and think that you've got a foundation for a lifelong partnership with someone, because you don't.
Right. There has to be more to it than that.
Yes.
And maybe what I like to point out, in 1850, a white female or male aged 20 could expect to live 40 years. Now, a 20-year-old can expect to live for more than another 60 years. So while back in 1850, the expectation of a lifelong marriage was 40 years, the expectation of a lifelong marriage now is well over 50 years. But again, we don't have the skills.
We don't have the skills, and if you marry expecting it to last a lifetime, it better be based on more than romantic love.
Right, and we're still holding on to this fantasy, this fairy tale that we're going to marry and be together until we die.
Yeah, and it's going to be butterflies when you're 98 years old, and it isn't.
Right. So, and I, don't get me wrong, Cathy, because I do believe in love, and I think the marriage is wonderful. I just think that I am looking for something that is a sustaining partnership that helps me grow and nourishes me. And I don't know that we can be realistically expect that to be from just one partner for our entire length of our lifetimes now.
Well, and that brings me to a question I was going to ask. When you, quote, commit to someone, that commitment comes with expectation. And in my opinion, if those expectations are unreasonable, it's unreasonable to think that that commitment is going to last.
You're
so
right.
I think you're healthier going into it saying, let's see where this goes. Let's do our best, do the work that we need to do, and see where this goes.
Right, and I think when people make those commitments at the time that they get married, everybody genuinely believes it. But we have no way of knowing what the future is going to hold for us. And I think it's unrealistic to hold yourself to keep a wedding vow or an expectation that couldn't possibly have foretold the circumstances of your marriage.
No, it is unreasonable. And a wedding vow doesn't lock anyone in. It doesn't. You know, you make promises and you take vows, but it doesn't lock anyone in. I read a comment online from a young woman who had just gotten married, and she said, he can never leave me now. And I thought, but he can.
Well, yes, it's not the piece of paper that's going to, it shouldn't be the piece of paper that bonds two people together.
Yeah.
There has to be more to it than a marriage license.
Yeah, and that goes right back to your expectations. This young lady had the expectation that marriage meant that he was going to always be there. And that's not always the case. If you're lucky, it's the case. But 40-something% of the time, that's not the case.
It's not the case. And the other myth associated with that I'd like to point out, Cathy, is that divorce doesn't mean breaking your wedding vows. I think that I hear that a lot from people, is that I can't get divorced because it would mean breaking my wedding vows. But the truth is that the wedding vows have been broken long before somebody starts talking about divorce, because it's all the behavior that's been oftentimes been going on for years that have broken the wedding vows. Exactly.
Once that intimate emotional bond is broken, those vows are broken, in my opinion.
Right. So
especially if you're in a situation where there's infidelity or domestic abuse, those vows were never there in the first place.
Right, they're gone. So let's get away from thinking that divorce breaks the marriage vows, because it doesn't. What it does is, thinking about divorce opens a conversation to say, are we in a position to really recommit to our wedding vows? Because if we're not, then we do need to end this.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Divorce brings to an end something that's already dead.
Yes, absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about something else that you mentioned very early on, is that divorce is often seen as you haven't worked hard enough at your marriage. That your marriage has ended just because you didn't put enough effort into it. And I would say, all relationships take commitment from both parties to make them work. And that's not just in a marital or an intimate relationship. It's any type of relationship. But it's a dual commitment. You can't sustain the relationship if one person has already checked out or you're both moving in different directions.
Exactly, yeah, I agree. And, there are special situations when you're married to someone with a personality disorder, someone who doesn't have the emotional capacity to commit and work on that marriage. That's a different story altogether. And if you can realistically look at your marriage for what it is, you have to know that it doesn't matter how much work I put into this. It's not going to, it's not going to make any difference, because he or she is sitting over there doing nothing except causing more drama.
Right. And Cathy, can I share a personal story?
Yeah, please.
So when I was growing up, my grandparents lived very close to us, and I used to go around there every Saturday afternoon for tea. And I'd always just walk in the back door. Well, I wouldn't knock first. I'd just walk in. So when I was in my early 20s, my grandfather had had a stroke, and I went round there, walked in the back door, and I heard him yelling at my grandmother. And I had never heard him yell before. And she was in tears. I'd never seen her cry before. So I walked up to her, put my arm around her, and she was a lot shorter than I was. And I just said, "Oh, Gran, don't take it to heart, please. You know, he doesn't mean what he says. It's his stroke. He's frustrated. You know, just he doesn't mean it." And she looked at me and she said, "My dear, he's been like this all his life."
Oh, my word.
And I didn't know what to say
after
that.
So well hidden.
Absolutely. And that really, I mean, I've got goosebumps now as I'm telling you that story, but that to me was like, why do we hold out this ideal of a lifelong marriage if it's not sustaining and if it's more like an endurance test?
Right. Why should it be an endurance test? You know, I consider myself lucky. My grandparents, my paternal grandparents, were divorced. My mom, before she married my father, was divorced. So I came from a line of women who weren't afraid to say, "No, thank you, I'm out of here." You know, but so many marriages, it is exactly what you said, an endurance test. How much more of this can I stand? Right.
What do I have to do to make it through to the next 6 months? Or even divorce is not an option. It's just not going to happen. This is what I have. This is what I married into. This is the best it is.
And there's also the mistaken belief on the part of many that if you put enough effort into it, you can fix that other person.
Right.
You know, he's a yeller and a screamer, or he's abuses alcohol. Well, if I work hard enough, I can change him or her, and it just doesn't work that way.
You and I both know that, and so you know, I had put in my notes for this that, you know, the challenge for that question about when have you worked hard enough, or you haven't worked hard enough on your marriage if you're thinking about ending it, is when do you know that you've worked hard enough? When do you know you've tried everything?
No one arbitrarily leaves a marriage without a reason.
Right.
And to say to someone you did not work hard enough on your marriage is accusing them of leaving for no reason whatsoever.
Right.
I
think that when you know that you have no hope of change, when you truly believe that life outside of the marriage will be healthier for you, that's when you know that you've worked as hard as you can.
Yeah, I do think that if there are children involved, you know, we owe them extra consideration. But even with children, you get to a point to where it's toxic for your children if you stay.
Right, absolutely.
And I know so many adults with issues from parents who did not set a good example of them. For them, and you don't stay together for your children. You work a little bit harder on it for your children, but they're you know, if it's time to pull the switch, you pull the switch for your sake and your children's sake.
And then you put your effort into creating a civil environment for your children where they do have two homes, and you minimize their exposure to the conflict post-divorce. Yep,
and I think you're going to bring up another topic that plays into.
So the myth that I have is my family is broken. I don't want to break my family up. I don't want to hurt the children. And I think there's so much of our language around divorce that is like, we talk about failure, broken promises, broken vows. I think that comes from a dominant majority, which in our case here is going back centuries, are white males. It's often associated with religion. And they, frankly, were the people that had most to gain by keeping other people locked into marriage through social pressure.
Right.
I think there's plenty of evidence today that family doesn't mean mom, dad, and 2 kids. And as I've been thinking and working through this, I think that actually it never has. My gran had an adopted sister whose parents were killed in the First World War. She was unrelated to my gran. My mother also had a quasi-adopted sister whose mother died while she was very young. I think all families have those stories, and there are some black sheep as well. I know that there was a distant uncle of mine who left his wife in England because she was an alcoholic, and he went to live in South Africa where he married somebody else. I'm assuming they somehow got divorced, or maybe his wife in England passed away, but nobody ever spoke about him.
And that's sad.
Yeah,
that's
but
sad.
It's that whole social stigma that we've grown up with that has created, again, this fantasy, this fairy tale. The family is mom, dad, 2 kids, white picket fence, and pets.
Yeah, and even if that's the way your child's family started off, a divorce doesn't mean that that's broken. It just means that it's taking on a different form.
Yes.
Because, children are going to view mom and dad as their family, whether mom and dad's married or not. And the way mom and dad handle co-parenting after a divorce will impact the child greatly on how they view their family and whether they are part of a good family, a good solid family.
Yes.
You may be living in different households, but that doesn't mean you're not still a family.
Right, and that's something that's the message that I certainly emphasize to my kids when I was going through this myself. It's what I help make sure that my clients are sharing with their kids. You are still a family. You just look a little different. And if your kids look around their classrooms, there's lots of their classmates that have very different looking families now.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And that's the good news is that we are more open about the differences in our families than we used to be. And I think that will help our children to make much better transitions as their parents separate.
Well, it's just going to be healthier as a society when we become more open to accepting different models of what it means to be a family.
Right. And the other myth we should talk about here was, this myth that divorce means that it has to be hostile. And I think when you divorce your in-laws and your other extended family. That doesn't have to be the case if it can work, if you have established ties with that family. I have known plenty of instances where the former wife still gets together with her in-laws at Christmas time, at Thanksgiving, and is still treated as part of the family.
Oh, yeah. When I was still married, my ex was from Washington State, and we were living in the South, so we were far enough away that we couldn't participate in everything, but one of my brother-in-laws was divorced, and his wife, if there was a birthday party, if there was a gathering at the Bay House for the 4th of July, she and the girls came, and Jim would be there, the whole family would be there. She was still a member of the family, and it was a very civil atmosphere. I dated a man after my divorce and had Thanksgiving dinner with him and his family, and part of his family was his ex-wife and his children. So, it was a very civil atmosphere. I don't think that divorce has to mean ongoing anger. There's going to be hurt feelings, there's going to be anger, but it's something you can work through.
And our children so appreciate it when we can do that.
Yes, they do.
Because
I know from personal experience how much they appreciate it.
Right, absolutely. So another myth, which is a little bit similar to the one that we started off talking about with I'm a failure because my marriage ended, is my marriage failed. And I like to tell people, no, it didn't fail. It ended. Because every relationship has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We just don't know when the end will be.
Well, we don't know when the end will be. And to say that my marriage failed, divorce isn't something we celebrate. Not all of us, anyway. I didn't celebrate the end of my marriage. I didn't view it as a failure on my part, but it was a huge disappointment to me.
Yes.
You go into marriage with hopes and expectations, and if that marriage ends, those hopes and expectations aren't met. It's perfectly okay to feel disappointed and to feel sad, but that doesn't mean you failed.
Or that the marriage failed.
No.
And it's interesting to me that, I ask people like, Cathy, how many of your friends from high school or college are you still closely connected with?
Well, I'm kind of different because I've got 2 private Facebook groups, my high school friends, and some of them I went to first grade with.
Okay.
And then I've got my college friends. But I was always the person who planned the yearly get-togethers.
Okay.
And, wrote the emails. And I think if I weren't the one instigating all this, that everybody would have just kind of done off their own way. So I do have some very, very long-lasting relationships. I have one that I considered her my best friend for 5 years, and it recently ended.
Right.
And it ended because it needed to end.
And did you regard the ending of that friendship as a failure?
No, I regarded it as doing something positive for myself. And for her, I would imagine.
And when we leave employers, do we regard those relationships as failures? Most of us, no. There are reasons why those relationships have to end, and we understand those reasons, and we accept them. Marriage is the only relationship where we're taught from a very early age to see the end as a failure.
Well, and we're taught to flog ourselves, and
yes,
and you need to beat yourself over that. You did something wrong, or your marriage wouldn't have failed, and that's just not the reality of it. And that goes back to not having the skills to choose a proper mate.
Yeah, it's all tied in together. So I know that we're kind of coming up on our time here. I wanted to just show one more of my pet peeves, and that goes, divorce is not a marital status. A lot of companies still include marital status questions on registration forms. I just the other day registered for a frequent shopper card with a company, with a consumer shop, and they asked marital status, and they said single, married, or divorced. And I don't understand why they put divorce on there, because again, divorce is not a marital status. It's a life experience. Plus, these days, even married doesn't cut it with marital status, because we have civil unions living together, committed but not living together. The real question I ask myself is, why do these companies ask this information at all? What is the real information that they're trying to get at?
Right. I've often wondered that. I always mark the single box.
Yes, and if I do as well. If I'm feeling mischievous, then I'll check married and divorced as well. I check everything that applies. Some of the online forms won't let you do that. And interestingly, when I applied for car insurance, they went over the application with me, and I challenged the poor interviewer. about why they were asking for divorced or married or single. And he actually said to me, well, if you're divorced, your rates will be lower than if you're single.
Yes, and if you're a single woman, your rates will be higher than if you are a single man.
Right. But that was a case where, they're obviously using that as a proxy for some other information. And
Right.
And they're not asking the right question. So that's my pet peeve, Cathy.
Well, I don't care for it either. And I can remember one doctor that I saw, I marked single, and then he was looking, and he said, you have 2 children. And you've never been married? And I didn't say a word. I just let him be confused about it. I'm sure when I left, he thought, wow, what a wanton woman she is.
So, Cathy, I think, there are probably more myths that we can talk about. I love collecting these stories and then dispelling them because, as I said, I do think it's really important for people who are going through the end of a marriage to start thinking about their beliefs about marriage and divorce and where they came from and if those beliefs still really serve them.
Yeah, and define your own reality for yourself. Don't let outside forces define your reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, it's been good talking to you. It's been a lot of fun.
It has. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this, Cathy.
You're welcome. We need to get together again sometime.
Sure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.